Welcome to Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I played on the PS5 because PS5 exclusive. So let's get into the story, and you once again play as Cloud and his merry band of misfits. They're still pursuing Sephiroth, and this time they have left Midgar. They are going to follow him wherever he goes, whether that means defying fate or not. And by not, I mean, yeah, they're definitely defying fate, which leads into another element in this game that they kinda started to touch on at the very end of the last game, which is multiple timelines, and that kinda really threw me off at first. And it's still a little weird in this game as well. I think they start to make it work to their advantage in some ways, but then it led to some weird stuff that I didn't necessarily love at the end of the game. The end of the game, that whole timeline element was a bit of a mishmash for me. There were parts that I really enjoyed, and then there were parts that I really hated to it. But overall, I would say I did enjoy the story. Now let's get into the audio, and the first thing I'm going to say is the music is phenomenal in this game. I generally love the Final Fantasy music, and that is true in this as well. It is a soundtrack that I would and intend to own. As for all the sound effects and whatnot, I think those are very well done. I did have a couple of weird glitches here or there where just all sound would cut out just for like a second, but it only happened a couple of times. But otherwise, whether it's combat, whether it's just whatever's going on in the world around you, creatures, etc., I think the sound effects are very well done. Then last but not least, you have the voiceover work, and I think the voiceover work is good. I think the quality of acting is good. I will still say that I don't necessarily love all of their choices for voice actors. I think some of the previous voice acting and voice actors have done a better job with some of these characters than in the remake trilogy that they're making. They also made a real choice with one of the characters, and I gotta say, I didn't like it at all. I'm not gonna say it and spoil it, but I have a feeling if you have played it, you know what I'm talking about, and if you start playing it, you're gonna hit a point and know what I'm talking about. I think some of the writing is fantastic in this game, and the characters do a great job bringing some of that to life. I think there are some hilarious interactions that really just had me full on laughing, and so I appreciated that. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and just like the original game, this is the point in time when you get into essentially the open world. And I don't know that I'm gonna say that it's a complaint, but it definitely feels like they're chasing trends with how they did it in Rebirth. Because you hit the open world, and there's a lot of open world elements that we've seen in other classic open world games, including climbing towers to reveal things on the map. They definitely did the stereotypical open world thing where they jammed a bunch of other stuff into it, and some of it felt really out of place. Specifically for me, the whole Moogle situation, I felt that everything to do with that was really out of place. I mean, I know Moogles have been a part of the Final Fantasy worlds forever, but the way they did it here, it just didn't feel like it fit in Final Fantasy VII in my mind. And maybe that's me being like crotchety and, you know, oh, traditional Final Fantasy VII. But even in this, it felt weird. Had they done this shit in Remake, it would have felt weird there. So it definitely feels weird in Rebirth. But not unlike Remake, you have your main mission, but then you also have side missions, and there's actually like a board where you can go and find those in each like town area, as well as stumble upon them yourself, as well as like the tertiary, like traditional open world bullshit that you would find in other games. I call it bullshit. I won't say it necessarily hurt the game, but I don't feel like it was a necessary addition either. You have your new mini game of like Queen's Blood. You have a bunch of other stuff. You have things that fit very well into Gold Saucer, which I enjoyed. As for the combat, it's very much what Remake had. It's the much more action-oriented stuff that Square Enix has been doing in their RPGs lately, and it works. I was actually really happy with it. I found that it was in some ways easier. Like, I definitely found the boss fight much easier in Rebirth than in Remake. Maybe that's just a me thing. But on the topic of bosses, I felt like the last few chapters of the game got really boss rushy. It got a little annoying and exhausting in my opinion. Not necessarily like ruining the game, but it felt a little annoying. Like if you hit a boss fight, you knew in another 5 minutes there was going to be a boss fight and probably a third one. And then you'd have some normal gameplay, and then next boss would lead to another 3 boss fights. And again, I wouldn't say it ruined anything, but it just felt like a weird design choice in my opinion. Oops, and before I forget, there is kind of a new game plus, which I enjoy in RPGs, any game with a lot of progression. It's not like regular new game plus, where you start the whole game over, you do a chapter select, and you can kind of bounce around with your upgraded character and stuff like that. But if you want to replay the whole game and just max out your character, you can do that as well by just going back to chapter 1 and playing the whole thing through. Now let's get into the controls, and I have zero complaints with the controls. They worked like the remake controls, and they're very responsive, they're very functional. I'm happy with them. Let's get into the graphics and visuals, and this is probably one of the weaker elements to the game. Probably the weakest, because it's a weird mashup in so many ways. All the party characters, gorgeously designed. Basically, characters in general, gorgeously designed, very detailed, very well animated, most of the time. But the amount of detail in the characters is phenomenal. Cloud's hair, you could count all the different hairs in every fucking spike if you wanted to. You can see details in Barrett's vest. I was really actually surprised with like Yuffie's cloak, because you can literally see individual threads when it's like threadbare. It's actually pretty cool, and like tattered threads, like you could see them. And the fact that they put that detail in there is awesome. But then you have things that lack that same level of detail, like moving around the world. It's really rocky and not well animated and at times, so that's kind of odd. Or like when your character's gonna like climb through a crevice, not your character, but like the characters in your party, they're gonna like shimmy through like a narrow space. The animation for that is weird, and they almost kind of like take the position and then warp to it, and that's just kind of lazy seeming to me. But then they took the time to give each character their own individual animation for sitting on a bench or opening a chest. But then when you get out of water, it's really poorly done and jerky, and you just kind of go from a swimming stance to like popped straight up, and they didn't need to be swimming in half a foot of water. But also, like, when a character gets out of water, the fact that they're completely dry, I've seen people complaining about that and getting a little too angry about it. But at the same time, we've had the technology for characters' clothing to appear wet and then dry gradually since the PS3, so why isn't it here? Then you had other weird things like the world being so beautiful and you can see all this cool detail, but then there are sections where there's like basically no texture and it's really just hideous. And you ran into that a bit in Remake as well, but it's much more noticeable here, and I noticed a lot of areas where I'm just like, okay, here's a textured rock, and then literally right next to it is an untextured rock. Which then at the same time, when you're running around a town, if you listen to the people and what's going on and see what's going on, you'll find all sorts of interesting interactions. So they put detail into that and into the world to give you just an extra element. But then, like I said, there's other stuff that lacks detail. As for character design, you know, they look great. I'm not going to say that they don't. I think the world overall, from a design standpoint, looks really cool. The creatures, the enemies, the different areas, the towns, all of that have an awesome design that I think benefits this game. Except for the Moogles, not my favorite Moogle design. I honestly find it kind of creepy. I'll also say that the new design for the weapons, and you know what I mean, I don't mean the weapons you use, not a big fan. These are definitely a different approach to that. In a lot of ways, it's a very beautiful game, and a lot of the complaints I have are just small details that I think they could do better on. Considering the amount of money going into this game, the amount of time going into this game, I think they could have done better, but overall, I do think it's a good looking game. It's just a weird mashup of like really detailed things and then really poorly detailed things, and I just find that weird, and I feel they could do better there. Okay, so to wrap this up, I think it's a great game. I really do. I don't necessarily think it deserves all the 5 out of 5s and 10 out of 10s and crap like that it's getting. Not to say that it's terrible by any stretch of the imagination, I just don't agree with some of their design choices, whether it's visual or gameplay. But none of those really destroyed my experience. Really, they barely harmed it. I still enjoyed playing this game. I will say I think Remake is better than Rebirth, but that's not to say that I don't fully recommend this game, because I do. I thought it was worth every penny, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, are you excited for whatever the next of the trilogy is? Are you scared that they might just fully beef it? I am a little bit. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.